The chrome wrench slipped from my calloused fingers, clattering against the concrete floor of the underground garage with a sound that echoed off the pristine white walls like a gunshot. I cursed under my breath, wiping the sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand, leaving a streak of motor oil across my skin. The scent of expensive leather and imported cologne still lingered in the air from when Mr. Blackstone had descended to the garage an hour earlier, checking on his collection of luxury vehicles before his evening meeting. 6 months I'd been working as part of the maintenance staff for Harrison Blackstone's estate, and still, the sheer opulence of this place took my breath away. The garage alone was larger than most people's homes, housing a fleet of vehicles that collectively cost more than a small country's GDP. Bentleys, Ferraris, Lamborghinis, and a vintage Aston Martin that he claimed had once belonged to a British spy, all maintained in showroom condition, their paint gleaming under the soft LED lighting that bathed everything in an ethereal glow. But it wasn't the cars that had drawn me to this job. It was the steady paycheck, the health insurance, and the fact that Harrison Blackstone paid his staff well enough that I could afford the specialized therapy my brother needed. 3 tours in Afghanistan had left Marcus with wounds that went deeper than the scars on his face, and the VA wasn't covering the experimental PTSD treatment that might actually help him sleep through the night again. I retrieved the wrench and returned to my work beneath the midnight blue Bentley Mulsanne, Harrison's preferred vehicle for important business meetings. The routine maintenance should have been straightforward: oil change, brake fluid check, tire rotation. Standard procedures I could perform in my sleep after my years as a combat mechanic in the Army. But something had been nagging at me all afternoon, a persistent unease that I couldn't quite shake. Maybe it was the way Jenkins, the head of household staff, had been watching me more closely than usual, or the tension I'd noticed in Harrison's shoulders when he'd inspected the vehicles earlier, his steel-gray eyes scanning each car with the intensity of a man who knew his life depended on vigilance. In his line of work, legitimate business ventures that operated in the gray areas of international commerce, paranoia wasn't just healthy, it was essential for survival. The brake lines felt wrong under my fingers. Too soft, too yielding. I frowned, adjusting the work light to get a better view of the hydraulic system. What I saw made my blood run cold. The line had been cut, not cleanly, but in a way that would cause gradual failure. Whoever had done this was a professional, someone who knew that an immediate brake failure would be too obvious, too traceable. This was designed to fail during high-speed driving, when Harrison would be unable to stop, unable to avoid whatever trap his enemies had set for him. My military training kicked in instantly, flooding my system with the familiar cocktail of adrenaline and razor-sharp focus that had kept me alive through 3 combat deployments. I rolled out from under the Bentley, my heart hammering against my ribs as I processed the implications. Someone had gained access to Harrison's private garage. Someone wanted him dead. And if my timing was right, he would be leaving for his meeting in less than 20 minutes. I grabbed my phone with trembling fingers, scrolling through the contact list for Harrison's number. He'd given it to all staff members for emergencies, though I'd never imagined I'd need to use it. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before his deep voice answered, calm and controlled as always. "Hannah, what is it?" "Mr. Blackstone," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "You cannot take the Bentley tonight. Don't leave the house. There's been sabotage." Silence stretched between us, heavy with implications. When Harrison spoke again, his tone had shifted to something harder, more dangerous. "Are you certain?" "The brake lines have been compromised. Professional job, designed to fail during operation. Sir, if you'd driven tonight." I let the sentence hang, knowing he would understand the gravity of what I'd discovered. "Stay exactly where you are. Touch nothing else. I'm coming down." The line went dead, and I found myself alone in the cavernous garage, suddenly aware of every shadow, every potential hiding place where someone might be watching. The pristine space that had always felt like a sanctuary now felt like a trap, its white walls closing in around me as I considered the possibility that the saboteur might still be nearby. Footsteps echoed in the stairwell, quick and purposeful. Harrison emerged from the elevator dressed in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, his dark hair perfectly styled despite the urgency of the situation. Behind him came Marcus Chen, his head of security, a compact man with intelligent eyes and the fluid movements of someone trained in violence. I'd rarely interacted with either man directly, keeping to my role as invisible maintenance staff. But now their full attention was focused on me with an intensity that made me acutely aware of my oil-stained coveralls and unkempt appearance. "Show me," Harrison commanded, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to immediate obedience. I led them to the Bentley, pointing out the sabotaged brake line with hands that had steadied since making the call. "Here, and here," I explained, highlighting the precise cuts that would have caused catastrophic failure. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. Military training, possibly special operations background. Harrison crouched beside me, his expensive cologne mixing with the scent of motor oil as he examined my findings. His fingers were steady as he traced the damaged line, but I could see the muscle in his jaw tighten as he processed the reality of how close he'd come to death. "Marcus," he said without looking up, "check every vehicle. Now." As Chen began his systematic inspection of the other cars, Harrison turned his attention back to me. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, intelligent and calculating, studying my face as if seeing me for the first time. "Your background," he said. It wasn't a question. "Combat mechanic, 82nd Airborne. 3 tours in Afghanistan." I met his gaze steadily, drawing on the confidence that military service had drilled into me. "I know sabotage when I see it, sir." "Mr. Blackstone," Chen called from across the garage, his voice tight with controlled alarm. "You need to see this." We hurried to where Chen stood beside the Ferrari, his expression grim. "Fuel line compromise on this one. Different method, same result. Delayed failure designed to cause an explosion during operation." Harrison's face went completely still, the kind of deadly calm I'd seen in soldiers before they entered combat mode. "All of them?" Chen nodded grimly. "Every single vehicle shows signs of professional sabotage. Someone had extensive access to this garage, probably hours of uninterrupted time to work." The implications hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just an assassination attempt. It was a coordinated assault designed to eliminate Harrison regardless of which vehicle he chose. Someone had studied his habits, learned his routines, and planned accordingly. The level of organization and resources required suggested this was the work of a rival with significant power and influence. "Sir," I said, my voice cutting through the tense silence. "This level of coordination, the professional execution, this isn't the work of a lone operator. You're dealing with an organization with military-level capabilities and inside information about your movements." Harrison's attention snapped back to me, his eyes narrowing slightly. "What else do you see?" I forced myself to think like the soldier I'd been, to analyze the scene with the tactical awareness that had kept my unit alive in hostile territory. "The timing suggests they knew your schedule. The methods used indicate multiple specialists, at least 3 different people with distinct skill sets. And the access required means either someone on your staff is compromised, or your security protocols have been breached." "Recommendations?" Harrison asked, and I was surprised by the respect in his tone, the way he was treating me as a professional rather than just a maintenance worker who'd stumbled onto something beyond her expertise. "Complete security sweep of all personnel, starting with anyone who had access to this garage in the past 48 hours. Change all protocols immediately, routes, vehicles, timing, everything. And assume that whatever meeting you had planned tonight is compromised. They expected you to be dead or incapacitated by now." Harrison nodded slowly, already pulling out his phone to make calls that would set new security measures in motion. But his eyes remained fixed on me, calculating something I couldn't quite read. "Hannah," he said, his voice carrying a new note of authority. "You're no longer maintenance staff. As of tonight, you're my personal security consultant. Marcus will brief you on current protocols, and I want your assessment of our entire operation by tomorrow evening." The promotion hit me like a lightning bolt, simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. Working directly for Harrison Blackstone meant stepping into a world where the stakes were life and death, where enemies lurked in shadows and trust was a luxury that could get you killed. But it also meant a salary that could cover Marcus's treatment, resources to help my brother heal from the wounds that the war had left on his soul. "Yes, sir," I replied, drawing myself to attention with military precision. "I won't let you down." Something flickered in Harrison's eyes. Approval, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit who understood duty and sacrifice. "I know you won't," he said simply, "because now your life depends on keeping me alive." As sirens wailed in the distance, summoned by Chen's calls to law enforcement contacts who could be trusted, I realized that my carefully ordered life had just been blown apart as surely as those brake lines would have destroyed Harrison's Bentley. Whatever came next, there would be no going back to the safety of invisibility. No return to the simple routine of maintaining cars and collecting paychecks. I was part of Harrison Blackstone's world now, with all the danger and complexity that entailed. And somewhere out there, the people who had tried to kill him tonight were already planning their next move. The first attempt on my life came 3 days after I'd prevented Harrison's assassination. I was leaving the specialty grocery store in the Marina district, arms full of ingredients for the dinner I'd planned to cook for Marcus during his weekend visit, when the black SUV came screaming around the corner with its engine roaring like a mechanical beast. Time slowed to a crawl as my combat instincts kicked in, the world crystallizing into sharp focus as I recognized the deliberate trajectory of the vehicle aimed directly at the sidewalk where I stood. I dove sideways, groceries scattering across the concrete in an explosion of vegetables and canned goods, my shoulder connecting hard with the rough brick wall of the building behind me. The SUV's bumper missed me by inches, close enough that I felt the heat from its engine wash over my skin and smelled the acrid scent of burning rubber as the driver yanked the wheel hard to avoid crashing into the storefront. Glass shattered somewhere behind me, either from my impact or from debris thrown up by the vehicle's reckless passage. As I rolled to my feet, ignoring the pain shooting through my ribs where I'd hit the wall, I caught a glimpse of the license plate disappearing around the next corner. My military training had kicked in automatically, cataloging every detail even in the midst of chaos. Black Escalade, tinted windows, partial plate number ending in 847. Slight damage to the front left bumper that suggested this wasn't the driver's first attempt at vehicular homicide. My phone was in my hand, before I'd fully processed what had happened, muscle memory guiding my fingers to Harrison's contact information. He answered on the first ring, his voice sharp with concern that told me he'd been expecting something like this. "Hannah, report. Attempted vehicular assault, Marina District Grocery Store. Black Escalade professional driver, definitely targeted." I kept my voice level, despite the adrenaline coursing through my system, falling back on the military communication protocols that had been drilled into me during basic training. I'm mobile and uninjured, but they know where I live, where I shop, probably my entire routine. "Chen is en route to your location. Don't move until he arrives." Harrison's tone carried the weight of absolute command, the voice of a man who was accustomed to life and death decisions. "We're accelerating your integration into the security team. As of right now, you're living on the estate." The line went dead, leaving me standing in the middle of a sidewalk covered with my scattered groceries, trying to process the fact that my life had just changed again. 3 days ago, I'd been invisible maintenance staff. Now I was apparently important enough to kill, which meant I was also important enough to Harrison that he was willing to bring me into the inner circle of his organization. Marcus Chen arrived within minutes, his nondescript sedan sliding up to the curb with the quiet efficiency that characterized everything about Harrison's operations. He emerged from the driver's seat already scanning the area for threats, his trained eyes taking in the scattered groceries, the scuff marks on the sidewalk where I dove for cover, the pattern of glass shards that told their own story of violence barely avoided. "Details," he said without preamble, opening the passenger door for me with one hand, while the other rested casually near the concealed weapon I now knew he carried. As we drove through the city toward Harrison's estate, I recounted every detail of the attack, watching Chen's expression grow more grim with each piece of information. "Professional operation," he confirmed when I finished. "Same signature as the garage sabotage, coordinated, well-planned, designed to look like an accident." "Who are we dealing with?" I asked, voicing the question that had been gnawing at me since I'd first discovered the sabotaged brake lines. This level of organization, the resources they're deploying, this isn't just business competition. Chen was quiet for a long moment, navigating through traffic with the smooth efficiency of someone who'd spent years in executive protection. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of knowledge that I sensed he rarely shared. "Vincent Castellano," he said, the name dropping between us like a stone into still water. "Old-school family operation, but with modern resources and international connections. He's been trying to move into Harrison's territory for the past 2 years, but conventional pressure tactics haven't worked. I filed the name away in my memory, already beginning to build a tactical profile of our enemy. So he's escalated to direct assassination attempts." "More than that," Chen replied, turning through the gates of Harrison's estate with a nod to the security guards who had clearly been expecting our arrival. "Castellano's not just trying to eliminate Harrison. He's trying to send a message to anyone who works for him, that loyalty comes with a death sentence." The implications hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't just a target because I'd prevented Harrison's assassination. I was a target because I represented something that Castellano couldn't tolerate: effective opposition to his expansion plans. By keeping Harrison alive, I'd proven that his organization could be successfully challenged, and that made me a threat that had to be eliminated. Harrison was waiting for us in his private study, a room I'd never entered during my time as maintenance staff. The space reflected the man himself, understated elegance combined with subtle displays of power. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 2 walls, filled with volumes on everything from military history to international law. A massive mahogany desk dominated the center of the room, its surface clear except for a secure phone and a folder that I suspected contained information about me. "Sit," Harrison commanded, gesturing to one of the leather chairs positioned across from his desk. He remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back as he studied me with those piercing gray eyes that seemed to see straight through any pretense or deception. "The attack this afternoon confirms what we suspected," he began without preamble. "Castellano isn't just targeting me. He's targeting anyone he perceives as a threat to his expansion plans. That includes you now, whether you wanted to be part of this war or not." I met his gaze steadily, drawing on the resolve that had carried me through 3 combat deployments. "What are my options?" A slight smile crossed Harrison's features, the first genuine expression of approval I'd seen from him. "Direct. I appreciate that." He moved to the window, looking out over the manicured grounds that surrounded his estate. "Your options are limited. You can accept our protection and work with us to neutralize the threat. Or you can try to disappear and hope Castellano loses interest before he finds you." The choice wasn't really a choice at all, and we both knew it. Men like Castellano didn't lose interest in threats to their operations. They eliminated them with the thoroughness that had built their empires. Running would only delay the inevitable, while putting my brother and anyone else I cared about at risk. "I'll work with you," I said, the words carrying more weight than I'd expected. "But I need to know what that means. What exactly is your business, Mr. Blackstone?" Harrison turned from the window, his expression becoming more serious. "Import-export operations with a focus on luxury goods and rare commodities. We operate in markets where traditional business practices aren't always sufficient. where personal relationships and reputation matter more than contracts or corporate structures. It was a carefully worded explanation that told me exactly nothing and everything at the same time. Harrison's empire existed in the gray areas where legitimate business intersected with more questionable activities, where the line between legal and illegal was often determined by which authorities you knew and how much you were willing to pay for their cooperation. And Castellano wants to take over these operations, I said, beginning to understand the larger picture. Castellano wants to modernize organized crime, to bring the efficiency of corporate structure to traditional family operations. My business model represents competition he can't tolerate, proof that his approach isn't the only way to succeed in these markets. Harrison returned to his desk, opening the folder and sliding it toward me. This is everything we know about his organization, his capabilities, his recent activities. I opened the folder and felt my blood run cold. Photographs of crime scenes, surveillance reports detailing assassination attempts, financial records showing the scope of Castellano's operations. It painted a picture of an organization with the resources and ruthlessness to wage war against anyone who stood in their way. The garage sabotage was just the beginning, Harrison continued, his voice taking on the tone of a military briefing. He's been systematically targeting my key personnel, trying to weaken my organization from within. Your intervention disrupted his timeline, but it also marked you as a primary target. I studied the photographs, my military training automatically analyzing the tactical approaches Castellano's people had used in previous attacks. He's got military-trained personnel, I observed, noting the precision and coordination evident in the crime scene documentation. Special operations background, probably mercenaries with international experience. Which is why I need someone with your background, Harrison said, leaning forward slightly. Chen is excellent at traditional security, but this requires combat experience. Someone who understands military tactics and can think like a soldier. The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders like a familiar burden. In Afghanistan, I'd been responsible for keeping my unit's vehicles operational under constant threat of attack. Now I was being asked to keep Harrison alive against an enemy with comparable resources and training. The stakes were different, but the fundamental challenge was the same: outthink and outfight an opponent who wanted to kill the people I was sworn to protect. "What's the immediate plan?" I asked, closing the folder and meeting Harrison's gaze with the confidence that had earned my sergeant's stripes in combat. "Chen will brief you on current security protocols and personnel. You'll work with him to identify vulnerabilities and develop countermeasures. And you'll coordinate with our intelligence sources to track Castellano's movements and anticipate his next moves." Harrison stood, signaling that the meeting was coming to an end. "Your quarters are being prepared as we speak. Personal security will be maintained at all times until this threat is neutralized." As I rose to leave, Harrison's voice stopped me at the door. "Hannah," he said, his tone carrying a note of something that might have been respect. "The fact that you saved my life means you understand the stakes we're dealing with. But what's coming next will test your limits in ways that military service couldn't prepare you for. Are you ready for that?" I turned to face him, drawing myself to attention with the precision that had been drilled into me during basic training. "Sir, I've been ready since the day I enlisted. The mission may have changed, but the commitment remains the same." Harrison nodded slowly, and for a moment I saw something in his eyes that looked like approval mixed with anticipation. "Good," he said simply, "because tomorrow we start hunting Castellano." The attack came at dawn, 48 hours after I'd moved into Harrison's estate. I was completing my morning security sweep of the perimeter, checking the sensor arrays and camera positions that formed the outer ring of our defensive network, when the first shot shattered the morning stillness. The bullet sparked off the stone wall inches from my head, close enough that I felt the heat of its passage and heard the distinctive crack of a high-velocity rifle round. Military training took over instantly, my body dropping into a combat crouch as my mind automatically cataloged the trajectory and probable shooter position. northwest tree line, approximately 300 meters, elevated position suggesting a sniper's nest in one of the old oak trees that bordered the estate. Professional setup, but not quite professional enough. A truly skilled marksman wouldn't have missed that shot. I keyed my radio with one hand while drawing the Glock 19 that Chen had issued me the previous evening. Contact, northwest perimeter. Single shooter, elevated position. I'm moving to flanking position Alpha. Harrison's voice crackled through my earpiece, calm and controlled despite the circumstances. Negative. Hold position until backup arrives. Sir, with respect, static defense gives the shooter time to reposition or call in reinforcements. I was already moving, using the landscaping and architectural features of the estate to mask my approach toward the tree line. I can neutralize the threat if I move now. Hannah, that's an order. I ignored him, switching my radio to Chen's frequency as I reached the edge of the formal gardens that separated the main house from the wooded area where our attacker was positioned. Years of combat experience had taught me that successful soldiers sometimes had to disobey orders when the tactical situation demanded it, and this was one of those times. The tree line was maybe 50 meters away across open ground, a killing field that any competent sniper would have covered with overlapping fields of fire. But as I studied the terrain, I realized that the shooter had made a fundamental error in positioning. The morning sun was rising directly behind their location, which meant they'd be looking into glare when trying to acquire targets near the house. It was the kind of mistake that suggested military training without extensive field experience. I took a deep breath, mentally calculating angles and timing, then sprinted across the open ground in a zigzag pattern that would make it difficult for the sniper to track me. 2 more shots cracked overhead, both missing by margins that confirmed my assessment. Competent but not exceptional marksmanship. I reached the tree line and immediately began working my way toward the shooter's position, moving with the stealth techniques that had kept me alive during night patrols in hostile territory. The sniper was exactly where I'd expected, positioned in a hastily constructed hide about 20 feet up an oak tree that provided good visibility toward the house but poor escape routes. Through the scope of my pistol, I could see that it was a woman, blonde hair pulled back in a tactical ponytail, expensive rifle with high-end optics. She was wearing civilian clothes rather than military gear, which suggested private contractor rather than organized crime soldier. I had her dead to rights, an easy shot from my position below and to her left. My finger tightened on the trigger as muscle memory took over, the familiar weight of lethal decision settling on my shoulders. In Afghanistan, this would have been a clean kill. No hesitation, no second thoughts. But this wasn't Afghanistan, and the rules of engagement were different here. "Drop the weapon," I called out, my voice carrying the authority of someone who had given such commands before. "You're surrounded and outgunned." The sniper spun toward my voice, her rifle swinging in my direction with desperate speed. I put 2 rounds center mass before she could complete the turn, the shots echoing through the trees like thunder. She fell backwards out of the hide, crashing through branches before hitting the ground with a sickening thud that spoke of broken bones and internal injuries. I approached cautiously, weapon ready in case she was still capable of resistance. But one look at her position told me that the fall had finished what my bullets had started. She was still breathing, barely, blood frothing at her lips as she tried to speak. "Who sent you?" I demanded, kneeling beside her while keeping my pistol trained on her chest. "Castellano," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Said you were. Priority target. Military background made you. Dangerous." "How many others?" I pressed, but her eyes were already glazing over, the light fading as blood loss and trauma claimed her life. Footsteps crashed through the underbrush behind me. I spun, weapon raised, to find Harrison and Chen approaching with tactical vests and automatic weapons. Harrison's expression was unreadable as he took in the scene. The dead sniper, the improvised hide, my defensive position with a smoking pistol in my hands. "Status report," he commanded, his voice carrying the tone of a military officer rather than a civilian businessman. "Single sniper, professional contractor confirmed working for Castellano. Threat neutralized. I holstered my weapon and began examining the sniper's equipment, looking for intelligence that might tell us more about the scope of the operation against us. High-end rifle, expensive optics, but poor tactical planning. This wasn't their best people. Chen was already photographing the scene with his phone, documenting evidence while Harrison studied my handiwork with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Clean kill," he observed, his tone neutral. "Professional work." I met his gaze steadily, refusing to show any uncertainty about what I'd done. "She was attempting to murder you and everyone else on this estate," I responded with appropriate force. Something shifted in Harrison's expression, a look that might have been approval or recognition of a kindred spirit. "Indeed she was, and your response was exactly what the situation required." He gestured toward the dead woman. "Chen will handle the cleanup. I want you in my study in 10 minutes for debriefing." As we walked back toward the house, Harrison fell into step beside me, his presence both comforting and unsettling. "You disobeyed a direct order," he said without reproach, simply stating a fact. "Yes, sir. The tactical situation required immediate action. Static defense would have given the enemy time to escape or reinforce." "And you made that decision knowing it could cost you your position here?" I considered the question carefully. "Sir, my position here isn't worth anything if you're dead. My job is to keep you alive, and sometimes that means making command decisions in the field." Harrison stopped walking, turning to face me with an intensity that made me acutely aware of the power he wielded. "Hannah," he said, my name carrying more weight than I'd expected. "Do you understand what you've just done? What line you've crossed?" The question hit me like a physical blow as I realized the full implications of what had happened. I'd killed someone on American soil, in defense of a man whose business operations existed in the gray areas between legal and illegal activity. There would be no official investigation, no military tribunal to review my actions. This death would disappear into the same shadows where Harrison conducted his business, becoming another secret I would carry for the rest of my life. "I understand," I said quietly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "And I'd do it again if the situation required it." Harrison studied my face for a long moment, as if searching for signs of doubt or regret. When he spoke again, his voice carried a note of something that sounded almost like respect. "Good. Because what happened here today was just the beginning. Castellano will escalate, and when he does, I need to know that you're prepared to do whatever is necessary to protect this organization." Back in his study, Harrison poured 2 glasses of whiskey despite the early hour, handing one to me with the casual gesture of someone sharing a drink with an equal rather than a subordinate. The alcohol burned going down, but it helped steady my nerves as the adrenaline from the firefight began to fade. "Tell me about Afghanistan," Harrison said, settling into his chair with the whiskey cradled in his hands. "What was it really like, fighting in a war where the rules weren't clear?" I sipped my drink, considering how much to reveal about experiences I'd never discussed with anyone outside my unit. Complex, dangerous, never black and white, always shades of gray where you had to make decisions based on incomplete information and live with the consequences. "And the killing? How did you handle taking lives in combat?" The question was more personal than anything Harrison had asked before, and I sensed that my answer would determine how our professional relationship developed. In combat, you don't have the luxury of moral uncertainty. You do what's necessary to complete the mission and protect your people. The philosophical questions come later, in the quiet moments when you have time to think. Harrison nodded slowly, as if my answer confirmed something he'd suspected. "And now? How do you feel about what happened in the trees this morning?" I met his gaze directly, refusing to show any weakness or uncertainty. "I feel like I did my job. Someone tried to kill you, and I stopped them. The fact that she died was her choice when she decided to come here with a rifle. No regret? No second thoughts about crossing that line?" "None," I said firmly. My loyalty is to you and to this organization. Anyone who threatens that becomes an enemy, and I deal with enemies the way I was trained to." Something changed in Harrison's expression, a subtle shift that suggested I'd passed some kind of test. He raised his glass in a small salute. "Welcome to the inner circle, Hannah. From this point forward, you'll be briefed on all security matters, involved in strategic planning, and given access to resources that most of my organization never sees." As the implications of his words sank in, I realized that killing the sniper had done more than just eliminate a threat. It had proven my loyalty in the most definitive way possible. I was no longer just an employee or even a trusted security consultant. I was part of Harrison's world now, complicit in the violence that kept his empire functioning, bound to him by shared secrets and mutual dependence. "What's the next step?" I asked, accepting my new role with the same commitment I'd once given to military service. Harrison's smile was sharp as a blade. "Now we stop playing defense and start hunting Castellano, and you're going to help me plan his destruction." 3 weeks after the sniper incident, I was sitting in Harrison's war room, a secure conference area in the basement of his estate that I'd never known existed during my time as maintenance staff. The walls were lined with monitors displaying real-time surveillance feeds from across the city, and a massive table dominated the center of the space, covered with photographs, maps, and intelligence reports that painted a comprehensive picture of Vincent Castellano's criminal empire. Harrison stood at the head of the table, his sleeves rolled up and his usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled from hours of strategic planning. Chen was there too, along with 3 other men I'd been introduced to as senior members of Harrison's organization, specialists in areas I didn't inquire too closely about. The atmosphere was tense, focused, with the electric energy that preceded major military operations. "Castellano has made a critical error," Harrison announced, tapping a surveillance photograph on the table. "His escalation against our organization has drawn unwanted attention from federal law enforcement. The FBI's Organized Crime Task Force has opened an investigation into his activities." I studied the photograph, which showed Castellano meeting with several men in expensive suits outside what appeared to be an upscale restaurant. "How does that help us?" I asked, though I was already beginning to see the strategic possibilities. "It means we can accomplish our objectives through cooperation rather than direct confrontation," Harrison replied, his tone carrying the satisfaction of a chess master who had maneuvered his opponent into check. "Chen has been developing contacts within the task force, and they're very interested in the intelligence we've gathered about Castellano's operations." Chen stepped forward, placing a thick folder on the table. Detailed financial records, shipping manifests, personnel files, communication intercepts, everything we need to build a federal case that will dismantle his organization permanently. The elegance of the strategy impressed me. Instead of engaging in a bloody war that would attract attention and cost lives, Harrison was using Castellano's own aggression against him, turning federal law enforcement into an unwitting ally in neutralizing the threat. It was the kind of tactical thinking that had made Harrison successful in business, identifying leverage points and exploiting them with surgical precision. "My role in this?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "You're our primary contact with the FBI," Harrison said, meeting my gaze with an intensity that made the assignment feel like more than just a professional responsibility. "Your military background gives you credibility with federal agents, and your recent experience with Castellano's assassination attempts provides personal motivation that will seem authentic." I nodded, understanding the logic even as I recognized the risks. Serving as a liaison between Harrison's organization and federal law enforcement would put me in an extremely delicate position, requiring me to balance competing loyalties while maintaining the trust of both sides. One wrong word, one moment of doubt or hesitation, could expose Harrison's operations to investigation or compromise the federal case against Castellano. "When do we make contact?" I asked, accepting the assignment with the same commitment I'd once given to military orders. "Tomorrow morning. Agent Sarah Martinez, FBI Organized Crime Task Force. She's expecting you at 10 a.m. Harrison handed me a business card with federal seal embossed on expensive cardstock. She believes you're a private security consultant who's been targeted because of your association with my legitimate business interests. The cover story was thin, but plausible, close enough to the truth that I could maintain it under scrutiny while protecting the more sensitive aspects of Harrison's operations. I slipped the card into my jacket pocket, already beginning to mentally prepare for what would essentially be an undercover operation within my own life. "There's one more thing," Harrison said, his tone becoming more serious. "Martinez has requested a meeting with me as well. She wants to interview me about Castellano's activities and my knowledge of his organization." The implications were staggering. Harrison would be sitting across from a federal agent, answering questions about his business while concealing the true nature of his operations. It would require a performance of extraordinary skill and nerve, the kind of high-stakes deception that could either eliminate our enemies or destroy everything Harrison had built. "Are you comfortable with that level of exposure?" I asked, genuinely concerned about the risks he was taking. Harrison's smile was confident, almost predatory. "Hannah, I've been hiding in plain sight for years. The key to successful deception isn't avoiding scrutiny. It's controlling what the investigators find when they look." Over the next several hours, we refined the strategy, identifying exactly what intelligence would be most valuable to the FBI, while protecting Harrison's core operations from exposure. It was delicate work, requiring us to anticipate how federal agents would interpret and follow up on the information we provided. As the meeting broke up and the others filed out of the war room, Harrison asked me to remain behind. We were alone in the secure space, surrounded by the technological infrastructure that kept his organization one step ahead of its enemies. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken implications of what we were about to attempt. "Hannah," he said, moving closer until I could smell his cologne mixed with the faint scent of the whiskey he'd been nursing throughout our planning session. "What we're about to do will change everything. Once we involve federal law enforcement, there's no going back. Are you prepared for that?" I met his gaze steadily, drawing on the resolve that had carried me through 3 combat deployments. "Sir, I crossed that line the day I killed the sniper. Everything since then has been a logical progression of that decision." Something flickered in his eyes. Approval, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit who understood the weight of irrevocable choices. "Good, because what happens next will test your limits in ways you haven't experienced yet." He moved to the wall safe concealed behind one of the monitors, his fingers dancing across a complex combination lock. From inside, he withdrew a small velvet box that he placed on the table between us. "Open it," he commanded softly. Inside the box was a pendant, a delicate silver piece shaped like a compass rose, with a tiny GPS tracker embedded in its center. The craftsmanship was exquisite, clearly expensive, but its true value lay in the technology it contained. "Emergency communication and tracking device," Harrison explained, lifting the pendant from its case. "If anything goes wrong during your meeting with Martinez, if you sense any threat or complication, touch the compass point twice. We'll have a tactical team at your location within minutes." As he stepped closer to fasten the chain around my neck, I became acutely aware of his proximity, the heat radiating from his body, the careful way his fingers brushed against my skin as he secured the clasp. The pendant settled against my collarbone, its weight a constant reminder of the trust he was placing in me and the responsibility I'd accepted. "Harrison," I said, his first name slipping out before I could stop myself. The informality hung in the air between us, a breach of protocol that somehow felt significant. "Yes?" His voice was softer than usual, his hands still resting lightly on my shoulders. "Thank you for trusting me with this, for believing I could handle it." His fingers tightened slightly on my shoulders, a gesture that was both possessive and protective. "Hannah, you've proven yourself in ways that most people never could. The sniper, the strategic planning, your willingness to cross lines that others wouldn't even approach. You're exactly what this organization needs." The intensity in his voice made something flutter in my chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with professional pride, and everything to do with the man standing inches away from me. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Somewhere between preventing his assassination and planning our counterattack against Castellano, my feelings toward Harrison had evolved beyond professional loyalty into something far more dangerous. "Sir?" I began, but he cut me off with a slight shake of his head. "Not sir. Not here. Not now. We're partners in this. Hannah. Equals in everything that matters." The words hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I was ready to cross. Partnership implied a level of intimacy and trust that went far beyond employer and employee, beyond even the bonds forged in combat. It suggested a future where my place in his world wasn't just as hired protection, but as something more fundamental to his life and organization. Before I could respond, his phone buzzed with an urgent message. The moment of intimacy shattered as Harrison's expression hardened, shifting back into the focused intensity of a man accustomed to life and death decisions. "Castellano's moving," he said, reading the message with grim satisfaction. "Intelligence suggests he's planning something major within the next 48 hours, which means our timeline just accelerated." I touched the pendant at my throat, feeling its weight as a reminder of the trust between us. "Then we'd better make sure Agent Martinez is ready to move quickly when we give her what she needs." Harrison nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on my face with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. "Hannah, when this is over, when Castellano is neutralized and the immediate threat has passed, we're going to have a conversation about what comes next. About what partnership really means in my world." The promise in his voice sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with anticipation. "I look forward to it," I replied, meaning every word. As we prepared to leave the war room, Harrison's hand found mine, his fingers intertwining with mine in a gesture that was both intimate and professional. "Tomorrow changes everything," he said quietly. "Whatever happens, we face it together." The weight of his trust, the warmth of his touch, and the dangerous promise of what lay ahead settled over me like armor. I was no longer just Hannah the maintenance worker, or even Hannah the security consultant. I was Harrison's partner in the truest sense, bound to him by shared secrets, mutual dependence, and something deeper that neither of us was quite ready to name. Tomorrow, I would walk into the FBI field office and begin the delicate dance of deception that would either destroy our enemies or expose us to forces beyond our control. But tonight, standing in the secure depths of Harrison's fortress with his hand in mine, I felt ready for whatever came next. Agent Sarah Martinez was younger than I'd expected, probably early 30s, with intelligent brown eyes and the kind of focused intensity that reminded me of military intelligence officers I'd worked with in Afghanistan. Her FBI field office cubicle was Spartanly efficient, case files stacked in precise order, a whiteboard covered with photographs and connection diagrams, and a coffee cup that suggested she'd been working long hours on the Castellano investigation. "Miss Chen," she said, using the cover identity Harrison's people had established for me. "Thank you for coming in. I understand you've had some concerning experiences related to your work with Blackstone Industries." I settled into the chair across from her desk, my hand unconsciously moving to touch the compass pendant beneath my blouse. The slight weight of it reminded me that Harrison was monitoring this conversation, ready to extract me if things went wrong. "Agent Martinez, I'm hoping you can help me understand what we're dealing with. The attempts on my life and Mr. Blackstone's have escalated beyond anything I experienced in military service." Martinez leaned forward, her expression becoming more focused. "Let's start with what you observed during the garage incident. Walk me through exactly what you found and how you determined it was sabotage." For the next hour, I carefully recounted the events of the past month, staying close to the truth while omitting details that would expose Harrison's more questionable business practices. Martinez took detailed notes, occasionally asking technical questions that tested my mechanical knowledge and military background. Her queries were sharp, professional, but I could sense her growing interest as I described the sophistication of the attacks against us. "The level of coordination you're describing," Martinez said, studying her notes, "suggests an organization with significant resources and military-trained personnel. That matches intelligence we've been developing about Vincent Castellanos' recent expansion into more sophisticated operations." I allowed surprise to color my expression, as if this was the first time I'd heard Castellanos' name connected to our troubles. "Vincent Castellano? The businessman?" Martinez's smile was grim. "Mr. Castellanos' business interests extend well beyond his public persona. We have evidence suggesting his organization has been systematically targeting competitors through intimidation, sabotage, and, when necessary, elimination." She pulled a thick file from her desk drawer, spreading photographs and documents across the surface between us. The images showed crime scenes, surveillance photos, and financial records that painted a comprehensive picture of Castellanos' criminal empire. Some of the intelligence was clearly from law enforcement sources, but I recognized other elements as information that could only have come from Harrison's organization. "This is what we're building our case on," Martinez continued, watching my reaction carefully. "But we need more than circumstantial evidence and intelligence reports. We need witnesses, people who can testify about Castellanos' direct involvement in criminal activities." The opening I'd been waiting for presented itself with perfect timing. "Agent Martinez, I may be able to help with that. Mr. Blackstone has been documenting the threats against his business, and he's expressed willingness to cooperate with federal authorities if it means stopping these attacks." Martinez's eyes sharpened with interest. "What kind of documentation?" I reached into my briefcase and withdrew a carefully prepared sample of the intelligence Harrison's organization had gathered: financial records showing suspicious transactions, shipping manifests that suggested smuggling operations, and communication intercepts that implied coordination between Castellano and known criminal associates. The information was genuine, but carefully selected to avoid exposing Harrison's own questionable activities. "Mr. Blackstone's security team has been tracking threats against his business for months," I explained, watching Martinez examine the documents with growing excitement. "He believes Castellano's organization has been conducting systematic surveillance and planning attacks against anyone who competes with their interests." Martinez studied the papers with the focused intensity of a prosecutor who just found the missing piece of a complex case. "This is extraordinary. Some of these financial records show connections we've been trying to establish for months. How did Blackstone's people obtain this information?" I shrugged, maintaining the careful balance between helpfulness and ignorance. "Corporate security consulting is beyond my expertise, Agent Martinez. I'm just a mechanical specialist who happened to discover sabotage attempts. But Mr. Blackstone indicated he'd be willing to meet with you directly to discuss his security findings." The hook was set. Martinez was practically vibrating with excitement as she realized the potential value of Harrison's cooperation. "When could we arrange such a meeting?" "I can ask him. But Agent Martinez, I need to know. Can you guarantee his safety? If Castellanos' people discover he's cooperating with federal authorities, the threat level could escalate dramatically." Martinez nodded gravely, her expression becoming more serious. "We can arrange protective custody if necessary, and we have resources for witness protection if the situation requires it. Mr. Blackstone's safety would be our highest priority." Perfect. Harrison had anticipated this conversation precisely, predicting that federal authorities would be eager enough for his intelligence that they'd offer protection, without questioning too closely how he'd obtained such detailed information about Castellanos' operations. The strategy was working exactly as planned. "There's something else," I said, leaning forward conspiratorially. "Mr. Blackstone mentioned that he believes Castellano is planning something major in the near future. Some kind of operation that would eliminate multiple competitors simultaneously." Martinez's pen stopped moving across her notepad. "What kind of operation?" "I don't have details, but he seemed to think it involved coordinated attacks against several business leaders who've refused to cooperate with Castellanos' expansion plans. He was particularly concerned about the timeline, something about it happening within the next few days. The urgency was calculated to accelerate Martinez's investigation and force federal authorities to move quickly, rather than conducting lengthy deliberations. Harrison wanted Castellano neutralized before he could launch whatever retaliation he was planning for our interference with his assassination attempts. "Ms. Chen, I need to speak with my supervisor immediately. Can you wait here while I make some calls?" I nodded, settling back in my chair as Martinez hurried from the cubicle toward what I assumed were the supervisory offices. Through the glass partition, I could see her engaged in animated conversation with an older man in an expensive suit who was clearly a senior agent. Their discussion involved multiple gestures toward Martinez's cubicle and frequent references to the documents I'd provided. 20 minutes later, Martinez returned with the older agent in tow. He was introduced as Assistant Director James Patterson, a man whose presence suggested that our intelligence had elevated the Castellano investigation to the highest levels of federal attention. "Ms. Chen," Patterson said, settling into an additional chair that had been brought into the cramped cubicle. "Agent Martinez has briefed me on the information you've provided. We're very interested in arranging a meeting with Mr. Blackstone as soon as possible." "Given the apparent urgency of the threat," Martinez added, "we'd prefer to meet with him today if his schedule permits." I made a show of checking my phone for messages, then nodded gravely. "I can contact him, but he's expressed concerns about meeting at federal facilities. Too visible, too many opportunities for surveillance by hostile parties. He'd prefer a neutral location." Patterson and Martinez exchanged glances, clearly weighing security considerations against the value of Harrison's cooperation. "What would he consider appropriate?" Patterson asked. "Private dining room at the Metropolitan Club," I suggested, naming an exclusive venue where Harrison's presence would seem natural while providing the discreet atmosphere federal agents would require for sensitive discussions. "He maintains a membership there, and the facility has excellent security protocols." "Acceptable," Patterson decided after a moment's consideration. "Can you arrange a meeting for this evening?" I sent a carefully prepared text message to Harrison's secure phone, using language that would appear innocuous to anyone monitoring communications, but would confirm that the federal authorities were responding exactly as we'd anticipated. Harrison's reply came within minutes. "Meeting confirmed. Metropolitan Club, Private Dining Room 7. Looking forward to productive discussions." As I relayed the meeting details to Patterson and Martinez, I felt the satisfaction of a perfectly executed operation. Federal law enforcement was now committed to moving against Castellano based on intelligence we'd provided, while Harrison would appear as a cooperative citizen, assisting with a legitimate investigation. Whatever happened next, we'd gained powerful allies in our war against Castellanos' organization. "Ms. Chen," Patterson said as our meeting concluded, "you've performed a valuable service for federal law enforcement today. Mr. Blackstone is fortunate to have someone with your background protecting his interests." I accepted the compliment with appropriate modesty, but internally I was calculating the next phases of our strategy. Tonight's meeting would determine whether federal authorities moved quickly enough to prevent Castellanos' retaliation, or whether we'd need to implement more direct measures to protect Harrison's organization. As I left the FBI field office, the compass pendant seemed to pulse against my skin, a reminder of the trust Harrison had placed in me, and the delicate game we were playing with forces that could either save us or destroy everything we'd built together. The real test was still to come. The Metropolitan Club's private dining room was a study in understated elegance, with mahogany paneling that gleamed under soft lighting and oil paintings of long-dead industrialists who seemed to watch our clandestine meeting with approval. Harrison sat at the head of the polished table, impeccably dressed in a navy suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary, while Patterson and Martinez flanked him with the focused attention of federal agents who sensed they were on the verge of a major breakthrough. I positioned myself slightly behind Harrison's chair, playing the role of protective consultant while monitoring the conversation for any signs that our carefully constructed narrative was beginning to unravel. The compass pendant beneath my blouse felt warm against my skin, a constant reminder of the trust between us and the stakes we were playing for. Mr. Blackstone, Patterson began, spreading a selection of documents across the table. The intelligence Ms. Chen provided this morning has been extraordinarily valuable to our investigation. We're hoping you can help us understand how your organization obtained such detailed information about Castellanos' operations. Harrison's smile was perfectly calibrated, helpful, but slightly mysterious, the expression of a successful businessman who understood discretion. Assistant Director Patterson, my security consultants use methods that are proprietary but entirely legal. Corporate intelligence gathering, financial analysis, pattern recognition based on publicly available information. When someone systematically targets your business, you develop comprehensive profiles of potential threats. It was a masterful non-answer that sounded plausible while revealing nothing about the actual sources of our intelligence. Martinez leaned forward, clearly eager to press for more specific details. The shipping manifests you provided show discrepancies that suggest large-scale smuggling operations. How did your people identify these patterns? Agent Martinez, Harrison replied smoothly. My import-export business requires detailed knowledge of shipping protocols and customs procedures. When we noticed unusual patterns in competitor activities, ships arriving at odd hours, cargo that didn't match manifests, payments processed through irregular channels, we began documenting everything for our own protection. Patterson nodded slowly, clearly finding Harrison's explanations credible. And you believe Castellanos' organization represents an immediate threat to your business and personal safety? Harrison's expression grew more serious, and I could see him calculating exactly how much urgency to convey without appearing melodramatic. Gentlemen, Agent Martinez, 3 weeks ago someone sabotaged my personal vehicles in a manner designed to cause fatal accidents. Ms. Chen here was nearly killed in what appeared to be a random hit-and-run. Yesterday, my security team intercepted communications suggesting coordinated attacks against multiple business leaders are planned for this weekend. The last statement was pure fabrication, but delivered with such conviction that both federal agents immediately straightened in their chairs. Patterson's expression shifted to the focused intensity of someone who just heard about an imminent threat to public safety. What communications? Martinez demanded, her notebook already open and pen poised. Harrison reached into his briefcase and withdrew a folder containing carefully prepared transcripts of intercepted phone calls, conversations that had actually taken place between Castellanos' people, but edited to suggest a larger conspiracy than actually existed. The intelligence was genuine enough to verify under scrutiny, but presented in a way that would force federal authorities to act immediately, rather than conducting lengthy investigations. These intercepted communications suggest that Castellanos' organization is planning simultaneous strikes against myself, Richard Thornton of Thornton Financial, and Margaret Walsh of Walsh Industries, Harrison explained, pointing to specific passages in the transcripts. All three of us have refused Castellanos' overtures for partnership in recent months. Patterson scanned the documents with growing alarm. When are these attacks supposed to take place? Based on the communications patterns, sometime in the next 24 to 48 hours, Harrison replied. Which is why I'm here tonight, instead of waiting for normal federal bureaucracy to process my concerns. The urgency was perfectly calibrated to force quick action, while avoiding the appearance of panic. Martinez was already reaching for her phone, clearly preparing to contact tactical teams and coordinate immediate protection for the named targets. Mr. Blackstone, Patterson said, his tone becoming more official. Are you willing to wear a wire and attempt to record incriminating conversations with Castellano or his associates? The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Harrison appeared to consider it carefully, projecting the image of a civilian weighing the risks of cooperating with federal law enforcement against a dangerous criminal organization. I'm willing to do whatever is necessary to protect my business and my people, he said finally. But I want guarantees about my security and that of my employees. Ms. Chen here has already been targeted once. I won't put her at further risk without adequate protection. Patterson nodded gravely. We can arrange immediate protective custody for you and your key personnel. And we have sufficient evidence from your intelligence reports to begin moving against Castellanos' organization, even without additional undercover operations. Perfect. Harrison had maneuvered federal authorities into a position where they would take action based on intelligence we'd provided, while appearing reluctant to expose himself to additional danger. The strategy eliminated any suspicion that he might be manipulating the investigation for his own purposes. There's one more thing, Harrison said, his voice dropping to a more confidential tone. Ms. Chen's military background has been invaluable in identifying security threats, but she's also been researching options for helping veterans with PTSD and combat trauma. If this cooperation leads to successful prosecution of Castellanos' organization, I'd like to use the resulting peace of mind to establish a treatment center for veterans who've been failed by traditional VA programs. The personal touch was brilliant, positioning Harrison as not just a cooperative witness, but as someone whose motivations extended beyond mere business interests to genuine concern for public welfare. I could see both federal agents responding positively to the idea, their expressions softening as they recognized the potential for something constructive to emerge from their investigation. That's commendable, Mr. Blackstone, Martinez said. My brother served 2 tours in Iraq. Programs like that are desperately needed. As the meeting concluded with arrangements for ongoing cooperation and witness protection protocols, I felt the satisfaction of a perfectly executed operation. Federal law enforcement was now fully committed to dismantling Castellanos' organization based on intelligence we'd provided, while Harrison appeared as nothing more than a concerned businessman assisting with a legitimate investigation. Walking out of the Metropolitan Club into the cool evening air, Harrison's hand found mine, his fingers intertwining with mine in a gesture that was both intimate and protective. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement like scattered stars, beautiful and somehow prophetic of the new chapter that was beginning for both of us. Well played, he said quietly, his voice carrying satisfaction and something deeper that made my pulse quicken. Just following your lead, I replied, though we both knew that our partnership had evolved beyond simple command and subordinate relationships into something more complex and significant. Hannah, he said, stopping in the shadow of a building entrance where we could speak privately. What we've accomplished tonight means Castellanos' threat will be neutralized within days. The FBI will move quickly, and when they do, his organization will collapse under federal pressure. I nodded, understanding the implications. And then what? Harrison's smile was warm, genuine, different from the calculated expressions he wore during business meetings. Then we build something better. The Veteran Treatment Center wasn't just manipulation, Hannah. It's something I want to create, with you helping to design and run it. Your brother Marcus will be our first patient, with access to the best PTSD specialists in the country. The offer hit me like a physical blow, not because it was unexpected, but because it represented everything I'd hoped for when I'd first taken the maintenance job at his estate. Marcus could get the help he needed. Veterans like us could find purpose and healing, and I could use my military experience for something constructive rather than just protective. Partners? I asked, echoing his words from the war room. Partners, he confirmed, leaning closer until I could feel his breath against my lips. In everything that matters. The kiss that followed was inevitable, the culmination of weeks of growing trust and attraction that had been building since the day I'd saved his life in the garage. His lips were warm against mine, his hands gentle but possessive as they framed my face. And for a moment, the dangerous world we inhabited faded into background noise, compared to the promise of what we could build together. When we finally separated, both breathing harder than the cool evening air warranted, Harrison rested his forehead against mine. I love you, Hannah. I think I have since the day you tackled me to prevent me from driving that Bentley. I love you too, I whispered, the words carrying more weight than any military oath I'd ever taken. Whatever comes next, we face it together. As we walked toward the waiting car where Chen sat behind the wheel with the patient professionalism of someone who'd witnessed the evolution of our relationship, I realized that my life had come full circle. I'd entered Harrison's world as invisible maintenance staff, evolved into his protector and partner, and now stood on the threshold of something even more significant. A future where our shared commitment to each other would create opportunities to help others who'd been failed by traditional systems. The compass pendant pulsed against my skin one final time as Harrison helped me into the back seat, a reminder of the trust that had brought us to this moment and the adventures that lay ahead. Tomorrow, federal agents would begin dismantling Castellano's empire. Next week, we'd break ground on a treatment center that would give veterans like Marcus the help they deserved. And sometime soon, Harrison and I would have the conversation about what partnership really meant when it extended beyond business into the most intimate aspects of our lives. But tonight, sitting beside the man I'd saved, and who had saved me in return, I felt complete in a way I hadn't experienced since before my first deployment to Afghanistan. The war was ending, the enemy was defeated, and the real mission, building something worth protecting, was just beginning.